Hello, and welcome to the third of our interviews looking at the future of English language teaching. This series, with representatives from across the English language teaching industry, is looking at how coronavirus, pandemic, and other factors are changing the way we work. Each week, Transform ELT is releasing a recorded discussion that explores different aspects of the impact on our profession. These will be released on YouTube through our Facebook page and our website. So we invite comments, critiques, further questions that we can feed into future interviews. So please do react and respond to these discussions. Each month, we will also be hosting a live panel discussion where you can comment and put questions to the interviewees that we're talking to. Further details about that will be published through our Facebook page and email alerts. Our guest this week is Sherri Leibert-Fujita. Sherri's been a teaching centre manager for the bulk of her career through language schools, language centres within universities, as well as currently a migrant education centre in the United States. Your institution serves the resident ESL population in your area, doesn't it? Can you tell us what the area is and tell us more about the context of your centre?
I'm in Spokane, Washington. Washington State, most people think of Seattle, which is on the West Coast. We're on the East Coast, so I can be in Idaho in about 15 minutes from where I live, if that makes any sense. And then we also are, reasonably close to the Canadian border. This is a very conservative part of Washington State. We're not in the same kind of liberal band that the West Coast is. But Spokane is a decent sized city, and we are famous among the refugee serving institutes like World Relief to being a friendly city to bring in refugees. So surprisingly, we have a large number of refugees that are resettled in this area. And the refugees primarily come from the Ukraine, some from Russia, and we also have refugees coming in from all different parts of the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan. We get quite a lot of refugees from different African countries. Some of them have spent a considerable amount of time in a refugee camp before they come here.
Right.
So we have students in our class who may have grown up in a refugee camp and have very few literacy skills in their own language, in their first language. So it's pretty tough to become literate in a second language. Yeah. And we have people who we might call, some people call them 1.5s, because they don't have total fluency in their first language and they don't have total fluency in English.
Okay.
Because of their disrupted childhood and use of language. So their language development in their first language isn't full. Even though they're adults, they may have the vocabulary of maybe a 12-year-old in their home country, and they can't read and write. So we have a pretty vibrant and fun to work with. As far as teachers are concerned, they're amazing students. Our program is designed to serve students who are either residents, American citizens, and we can also serve DACA or undocumented. And our funding comes from the federal government and from the state. So most of our students don't pay any tuition, or the tuition they pay is very small.
But you were mentioning before they might not have access to technology to enable them to be able to take classes remotely.
That's right. Most of the students in our program, especially when we started, didn't have computers. And if they did, they only had one, and they shared it with everyone in their family. So people couldn't just jump on whenever they wanted to, and everyone wants to have their class. If you're doing a synchronous lesson, chances are your synchronous lesson is in the morning, and that's when your kids have a synchronous lesson. And,
Right.
you know, like everyone wants to be on at the same time. And then we have the question of bandwidth. So if you have weak Wi-Fi, you can't use Zoom effectively. So we had problems, one with some of our faculty who were living out in kind of more remote areas who didn't have access to high quality internet. So it was hard for them to do Zoom lessons. And then we had the students who couldn't participate effectively because they kept cutting in and out. Luckily, my institution, Spokane Community College, had its own local funds that they were able to disperse to our students. So we made it super easy for our students to apply for funding, and they could use that funding to buy a laptop computer, a hotspot, or do whatever they needed to do. We also have another funding source called worker retraining. So students who fit in that category, like for example, if they just lost their job because of COVID, could also apply for that funding and buy laptops. So we were able to buy and help students buy or lend out a fair number of laptops and hotspots. But what we found was that the students don't know how to use them.
Yeah.
And so if you can imagine, if you had grown up in a refugee camp, your chances of using electronics is pretty limited. And if you lived in a country where electricity supply is not stable, which is quite frequent, you probably don't have great keyboarding skills. You know, you don't know how to make a capital letter on it. So we would, for example, you may have run into this yourself, like you help a student create a password, but then the student can't go back and type in the password without help for a while because they forgot how to make the asterisk. They forgot how to make the capital letter, right?
This brings me back to teaching Japanese students how to type in English in 1995. I was running internet English courses there. Now you're right enough; those kinds of problems, those basic technical problems about how to input information into an electronic device and what it means. You get people constantly changing their password because they keep forgetting it, or creating new IDs and multiple IDs and things.
Getting locked out.
Absolutely.
I'm sympathetic. Like, I don't know if you've ever tried to use like a different writing system like Arabic, for example. And I find it very hard to, even though intellectually I know that it's a different writing system and I need to compensate for that, I forget all the time. So I'm sure for students who are used to like Arabic writing systems or Cyrillic writing systems or whatever, have a really, really hard time with adapting to our writing system.
No, absolutely. But I think the assumption was that everybody had these devices already, or they just needed to access the information online. Everybody's got an iPad. Well, not in certain socioeconomic brackets, and certainly not a lot of the migrant population that you're talking about. Right. I think so. We've got students are having problems accessing the online materials, but we've also got teachers having problems putting together online materials at the drop of a hat, basically, to switch your teaching to online. Did your institution have issues with that, or were you relatively well prepared for it?
No. All of those things were true. So when I first heard about the pandemic, this is probably around, I mean, I'd been following it, but I never took it seriously because I didn't think it would affect us here. But when I heard that the director of the CDC said something like, you need to be prepared for this to severely impact your daily life. I think that was sometime in February. At that time, I still couldn't imagine it. And I asked people, how do you feel about moving to online instruction? And everyone told me it was impossible. All the faculty, like, no, our students can't do it. That's not our population. It's not going to work. And I left it. But then we were forced. because pretty much within a couple of days, our school was closed with very little notice. And luckily it coincided with the end of what we call the winter quarter. So we were able to end the winter quarter early. And then what we did was, instead of starting our spring quarter when we expected to, we started a week late. And so the administration's idea was to use that week where teachers would be paid their regular salary. They wouldn't be teaching, and they could use that week to get their courses online.
Right.
But, and we offered tons of remote training. So there was lots of online support for teachers. You know, we have an IT department, you know, and we have an e-learning director and staff who can work with teachers and help them we use what's called Canvas. I don't know if you have Canvas, but that's what we use. And so getting people onto Canvas and helping people figure out ways to deliver their content, but it's not enough time. And then there are teachers in our program who really aren't comfortable themselves with technology.
Yeah.
So they struggled quite a lot. So we were lucky because our state board that manages our federal funding reallocated funds that we would normally use to support travel, for professional development, to pay for professional development for teachers. So I was paying stipends to faculty to mentor other faculty and help them get their courses online. So it was challenging, not just for the teachers, but also the people who register the students and get the students placed into the classes. Yeah. They also had to do that online. So they had to do that over the phone or try to figure out how to do Zoom lessons. We couldn't do our placement test because normally our placement test is face-to-face. So we had to overcome a lot of structural and procedural problems within a really, really short space of time.
So there's a huge problem in your institution for moving those courses online. Do you think that your faculty are happy with the quality of the courses that they're providing online at the moment?
It's hard for me to answer that with 100% accuracy because I can't really say what people think precisely, but I don't think anyone's really satisfied. Even the people who are highly proficient are not totally satisfied. We do have some faculty who were teaching online anyway. So I think they were in a better place and their courses were already designed to be online. But that's a slim, you know, we serve probably, I don't know, just under 1,000 students a quarter. Right. So the number of students who were being served primarily online or hybrid was 20, 30 out of that. So it's a pretty small fraction. I found that people, what I said to the faculty at the beginning of the quarter when we went online is that they need to give themselves permission to just do their best. And I wasn't expecting perfection from them because it was such a stressful time and everyone was freaking out for different reasons, either their own personal health or their family or maybe their partner or someone in their family had lost a job. I mean, it was pretty catastrophic. So I said to people, I don't care. You do your best and whatever you do is going to be fine. And do the same for your students. Like if your students just need to get onto a synchronous Zoom just to talk to each other and just to care for each other in that time, that's all you need to do. Like, don't feel like you need to make sure that you've taught present perfect progressive and that you practiced it. And then, you know, like, I don't care about that right now. All I care about is that you can get to a place where you can comfortably work with your students and do whatever you need to do. So the expectation was just very, very open and generalized because I didn't want people to feel too much pressure. They were already freaking out. They already felt a lot of pressure. So I wanted to take that pressure off people. And all through this quarter, what we found is that a lot of our students dropped because the students couldn't keep up, or the online format didn't work for them.
Right.
And another added layer of anxiety is that we never know at any time when our circumstances change. So it's like teaching on quicksand,
Yeah.
because you never know. The next day we could suddenly say, you know what, you can't do this, or you have to do this from now on. I mean, we're always,
because of regulations that are coming through from the state board or
right.
your funding bodies and all that kind of stuff. So
Mhm.
it's you just don't know what's coming down the line.
We really never knew. So I observed the class, a synchronous class, earlier this week, and highly proficient teacher, um, fairly experienced and very popular teacher. She was trying to teach reading and develop reading skills. But how do you do that with a Zoom? Like normally, I would want my students to be interacting with a piece of paper, to be honest. I would want them to be annotating at the side of the paper. I would want to be guiding them through that process. I would want to kind of, like scaffold through the steps of, like, say, skimming or develop, predicting main ideas and then looking for them, like all of those pieces. But doing that online, where you have a laptop this big and you're trying to do this in a Zoom lesson and you're displaying a text on the screen, then you can't see your students anymore. They're really little, or you just see a few of them, right?
It's really complex, isn't it? Because I
Right?
mean, the use of the computer almost forces you to become teacher-centered. It's
Mm-hmm.
very difficult to move an interactive form of teaching online. I mean, yes, okay, you can have breakout rooms and you can set people off to do that, but the mechanics of doing that can be quite tricky.
So we talked a lot about flipped classroom. Um, and I think that developing that idea is the way to go. I think we may have to do more work with, giving students instruction on how we want them to process, like a text, for example. And then they just have to do it at home.
Yeah.
And then when you meet, that's your chance to talk about it. But
Yeah.
I agree with you. It was very hard to have an interactive, really communicative experience in that class setting.
So
Yeah.
you've moved the bulk of your class, well, all of your classes
Oh.
presumably online now.
Mm-hmm.
All of your faculty is now working online.
Yep.
My understanding is that this is not going to change. There is going to have to be some form of online provision
Mm-hmm.
for the foreseeable future
Yep.
because of the way that society is having to reconfigure itself.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you deal with that as a center manager? Um, what kind of structures do you need to put in place to look at how we're going to keep improving the quality of teaching, the quality of our online provision in the future?
It's okay. So our summer quarter starts on July 1st.
Mm-hmm.
We expect to be in what we call phase 3. Phase 3 means that we can have some face-to-face instruction.
Right.
We don't have a distancing requirement, but we will still have to wear some kind of a face covering
Mm-hmm.
when we teach, and our students will still need to wear face coverings.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked all the faculty who are teaching in the summer to let me know what format they prefer. Do they want to have face-to-face, or do they want to teach online? And I was surprised to see, this was just yesterday, that probably 80% of the faculty said they wanted to teach online.
Is that because they think that they can do as effective a job and they are thinking about their own personal safety as well as the safety of the students, or are there other factors at play there?
I think it's primarily they don't feel comfortable with the face-to-face environment yet. They don't feel safe. There are some caveats to teaching face-to-face, not just the fact that you have to wear a face covering, but you have to go through a training.
Yeah.
So you have to train through our safety officers, and you have to understand all the rules. Then you are responsible for a safety plan for your class. You're responsible for upholding the safety plan. So say, for example, a student doesn't wear a face covering, that's you as the faculty member have to enforce that.
Right. So there's a whole
And
bunch of new regulations coming into
yeah,
play with all of this.
and so people are thinking like, do I want to be dealing with that? That sounds like it's a lot of trouble. A lot of people don't want to teach with a face covering. And there's the regular face mask, but some people wear those like a shield thing. And so people are talking about, well, maybe I should get a visor. And, because when you teach, you want people to see your face. And there's a lot of different reasons for this. Some of them it can be this student needs to see your lips move because they read lips. And it's an accessibility piece, but it surprised me. A group of faculty who had only just a couple of months ago told me it was absolutely impossible to teach online have now come to the place where that's their preference for whatever reason. But what's going to happen is some of those classes won't fill because our students don't want online. They don't like it. So our enrollment dropped 30% in the spring, and our enrollment will be low in the summer, I predict, because students don't want online. They want the face-to-face. So they've been telling us, when you decide to teach face-to-face, I'll sign up.
Okay.
Right. So this
goes back to the technology gap that we were talking about before. Is that discomfort with certain students on using that technology? They don't know how. Right. It's difficult enough when you do know how to use the technology, I think, to deal with an online learning situation that's unfamiliar. But now I can see how that would be difficult.
Yeah. Especially we have one teacher that teaches level 1, and level 1 is level 1.
Beginners,
and you're more likely to have students with limited technology skills in level 1 than you probably are in the higher levels for a lot of different reasons. And we're probably talking about the students who have the least economic power, the students who probably get the fewest resources are in level 1, and I don't know, I would be very surprised if that class fills. I don't know if students will enroll.
Well, these days with the job market the way it is, we're on survival mode, really, aren't we? They need to prioritize making an income rather than the learning the language. Maybe making the income, they can learn a little language as they go along. But if they're in class, they can't make an income.
No, but one of the things, when we had a full economy and full employment, we were really struggling with enrollment, like in the fall quarter or the winter quarter. We really had to work for our numbers because people could get a job so easily. And so what I would tell people is, our competition isn't another school. Our competition is low-paid jobs. And we have to make the case to our students that they should come and upgrade their language skills so that they can get a better job. But it was so easy for people to just get a minimum wage job.
Right.
But now it's not. And so unemployment has always been good for community colleges, because when it's harder to find a job, that's when people come and upgrade their skills. And what we want is, our goal ultimately is to get our students in life-sustaining employment, not just minimum wage employment, but we want them to get a job which can sustain a family. And one of the easiest ones in terms of time is like commercial driver's license. You can get a commercial driver's license in 3 months. So, but you have to have some proficiency before you can take the test and learn how to drive. But once you've got that license, those guys make more than you and I do.
I know. An HGV driver in the UK can earn 50,000 a year, which is way beyond what I get.
Right. They make a lot of money. They work hard. They work for it. So I wouldn't want that life. But they can, and then there are other like pneumatic drilling or something like that. Those guys are making, in American dollars, they're making like 80 or 90 grand right out of the gate.
Wow.
And so what we want to do is encourage our students to get into that pipeline and increase their language skills. But right now, when there's so much uncertainty, like it might be a little bit easier in the summer. People know where they are with school and things like that. But when people had their kids at home, it was really hard for the adults to learn in the house because they had their kids running around. Yeah. So it was very disruptive. And then we really don't know what's going to happen. So our school made a commitment to be face-to-face in the fall. And that's great. But anything could happen. If the COVID numbers go up like it looks like they are right now, that could change. Yeah. And a lot of schools are planning to start a little bit earlier in the fall than they normally would, and then finish before our Thanksgiving holiday, which is right at the end of November, instead of going through till more closer to Christmas. So they're hoping that by doing that, they can mitigate any COVID resurgences in the winter.
Okay. Yeah, it's difficult to see what is going to happen. As you say, I think the description you had earlier on of being on shifting sands is quite appropriate. It certainly feels like that over here too.
Yeah.
But you've got a wider context as well, haven't you? Your wonderful Trump administration. How has it changed the way in which providers such as yourself are able to serve the linguistic minorities with limited English proficiency?
Well, first of all, the number of refugees coming in dropped immediately because he put so many restrictions on the number of refugees we could serve. So new refugees coming into the U.S. has dropped to almost nothing. Spokane, like I said, surprisingly gets quite a lot. But now what we are seeing is more domestic resettlement. So that means maybe a family of refugees came in and they were settled in, say, Atlanta, Georgia. They didn't like it there, so they've moved to Spokane. So we're getting resettled refugees, but they're coming from another place in the U.S. Right. And that's great, and we're happy to have them. And we also have a fairly unusually so large Marshallese community. So from the Marshall Islands. Yeah. I'm not sure how familiar you are, but that was where the U.S. did nuclear testing. Right. And Bikini Island, you may have heard of.
South Pacific, yes.
Yeah. So what happened was the U.S. ruined their islands by nuclear testing. So a lot of people living in the Marshall Islands have cancer or have other diseases that are a result of the radiation. So in kind of as a way to apologize, the U.S. said to the Marshallese, you can come to the U.S. and live here. They're not given citizenship, but they're allowed to live and work here. Another problem that Marshallese are having is because of global warming, the land is disappearing from their islands. So eventually everyone in the Marshall Islands will probably have to relocate. But there's quite a large Marshallese population also in Spokane that we're serving.
Wow.
But anyway, what I was going to say is that the problem with the Trump administration for us is one that he makes it harder and harder for refugees to come into the US.
Mhm.
He makes the refugee and the non-refugee, but just the linguistic minority population in our area feel unsafe.
Mhm.
It's easier for people to be targeted. Trump made a culture where white supremacy is more normalized.
Mhm.
So for people to be aggressive or angry or racist, openly racist to especially students of color, um, creates kind of a culture of fear. Um, but probably the worst hit is the students who come from maybe South America, Central America, Mexico,
Mhm.
because Trump has hit so hard um, on that particular population, because
Yeah.
he considers um, anyone from that region to be illegal,
Okay.
right? And so even if we have a student who is an American citizen or a permanent resident, if
Mhm.
they have relatives who are undocumented, they're afraid. So they don't want to come to school because they don't want to be in any system that could be connected to the government. So there's this enormous distrust of government and government funding. Also, Trump created a law in which if you've come into the US, say as a refugee, and you have permanent residence, if you access any entitlement, um, any kind of welfare, then you may not be eligible for citizenship in your future. So what?
Sorry? If
Yeah. So
you
if
apply
you
for welfare, you
if you
can't get
apply for
citizenship.
welfare or some other entitlement system like food assistance, and then later you apply for citizenship, that can be used against you to deny you citizenship.
What's the logic there?
The logic is we don't want you here. The logic, the
Okay. Dear.
logic is this is not your place.
Hmm.
Go back home. He wants people to self-deport and go back or leave, right?
To make it
He wants
so
to,
unpalatable to stay there that.
yeah, he's trying to create a culture of fear and a culture of unwelcomeness for anyone who is, particularly people of color and linguistic minorities who are people of color. Like you won't see that happen to Canadian
Hmm.
Canadian, what would I call permanent
Migrants.
residents? Yeah,
Yeah.
that you won't see that kind of targeting, but he really, really does try to whip up that sense of fear and distrust. Like, for example, until recently, Greyhound, which is our system of long distance
The
buses,
buses. Yeah.
was checking people's paperwork on the buses at the depots, but they only checked people who were of color. So, for example, my
Oh.
daughter, who looks Asian,
Hmm.
um, has every time she rode the Greyhound, she was asked to if she was an American citizen. But
Okay.
luckily, that was challenged and overturned, so Greyhound doesn't do that anymore. But that's just an example. Like people, lots of little digs, big and small, to make people feel unsafe. So his any Hispanic, Latino, Latina family is less likely to enroll in language training because they don't want to be associated in any way with any kind of system where they would have to say their name and their address. You know, one thing we heard from some of our students, if their children, adult children who are American, either an American citizen or a permanent resident, don't want to come to college because they don't want to leave their parents at home alone who are undocumented. because they're afraid their parents will be deported while they're away, and they won't be there to protect them. That's something else we're seeing.
And I presume, like, your sector within the United States must be one of the largest foreign language teaching operations in the States, the others being foreign students that are going to applying to universities, perhaps.
That's been decimated.
Yeah.
That particular industry has really suffered. I mean, Trump made it increasingly more difficult for students to get a visa to do language training.
Right.
So
I think we benefited from that in the UK. There was a huge increase in especially Chinese students coming to the UK over the last 5 years or so. That was a growing trend anyway, but I think it was made more pronounced by the way that the migration policies were going in the US. I think that's going to be hugely reversed now, though. We're going to talk to some people from representatives of higher education in future interviews, so hope to get a bit more detail on that. But yeah, we certainly benefited from your pain.
Yeah, we know. We can see Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK were our biggest competitors at that time, because they all had much easier immigration. It was much easier for people to get a student visa.
Yeah.
But and now students can't travel, so that particular piece, I'm not really sure. I know several programs that have actually shut down in the state, and some that are just limping along. It's going to be hard to pick back up.
Yeah, I think there are going to be a lot of redundancies among language teachers.
Yeah.
Because institutions are going to just start disappearing. Certainly the foreign students who were coming to the UK were funding a lot of these centres. That was how the universities managed to keep operating. And there are whole universities that are talking about having financial difficulties because of the lack of foreign students coming in now.
That's true.
It's really quite surprising that that's not acknowledged on a political level. That's seen as these institutions are seen as undesirable because they deal with foreign student populations.
Yeah, and it's there's a really great synergy on the campus when you have students from all over the place.
Absolutely, yeah.
And our students, they're residents of Spokane, and having I would say the programming that we do in my division, we're probably contributing the most to the diversity of the college than any other division, because we are the ones who are serving most of the students of color.
Yeah, and the problem is that politically, that's not seen as a positive thing, is it?
Well, no, I mean, it depends on which politics you're following, but I feel like our state has a very strong equity focus, maybe more so than other states, which is good. And the recent protests related to Black Lives Matter and the murdering of Black people by police has opened up a dialogue on our campus that I never expected to have, which has been very healthy. And I think ultimately it will be good for our students and our programming, because it's more apparent that most of the students of color are in adult basic education. And the reason they're in adult basic education, for a number of reasons, is because of a white supremacist system that failed them for a number of reasons. As you can imagine, if they're refugees, why are they refugees? If you take it right down to it, it's probably because of some form of colonialism that has failed and caused their state to fail.
Well, I think that's been a really interesting discussion. I mean, the issues that you brought up are not necessarily the kinds of things that many people on this side of the Atlantic would be thinking of as key issues in the ELT sector. But I think that those are going to be much more prominent in the future. We've got the protests over here too. Against the situation with George Floyd in the States, but they're also localizing those protests to deal with endemic racism in the UK as well. And I'm sure that's happening in other countries. And I think you're right. I think it's an important discussion to have. It's a necessary discussion to have. We should have been having it all the way along. And I don't really understand how we managed to lose sight of the ball on that. But I hope that it all works out for the good. You seem to be quite optimistic about the future, yeah?
I am a little more than I was maybe a month ago, I think. Although I don't know, optimism may sound too strong, but I'm extremely worried about second waves of COVID or whatever. Yes. I think that's going to happen. It's probably going to happen. I'm worried about how we can offer high quality programming to our students and how we're going to figure that out. We're going to have to figure it out somehow.
Well, I think it'll be interesting to come back to you in like a few months' time and see what kind of changes you made and how you managed to, what you think about the provision in the fall, for example.
Yeah, that would, and I'd love to hear what other people are doing. I think, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to know how people are building a truly communicative course online. And ultimately, my thing is, it's always, in the end, it's the teacher in the classroom. Like, otherwise, students don't need to have a class. They can just go online and teach themselves. Yeah. Like, they can buy a course that's already set up for them. You know, so why do they need to take a class? Why do they need a teacher? What's the point? And we know what the point is. It's that human connection, and that's that immediate and personalized feedback, and that guidance and direction. And if we can't provide that online, then students don't need us.
Yeah, maybe we need to think less about teaching the specifics of, what was it you said before, the past progressive, and focus more on the human side of communication, the support side of it, building strategies, and helping the students to deal with the situation in the best way they possibly can.
At least in the moment, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, Sherri. That was a really interesting discussion.
It was. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks for talking to you again at some point.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. That'd be great. All right.
Great. Thanks very much.
See you.